Welcome to Mid-South Viewpoint. Hi, I'm Byron Tyler. It's always a pleasure to get together with you in the Memphis and Mid-South area and talk about life in the M-Town. I love this city. I was born and raised here. Got some dear friends that always enjoy getting together with at times and sharing with. Recently, we had Dr. Danny Sinkfield on talking about some great things in his ministry and monumental things happening. But Danny, it's good to see you back, and we're going to talk with my also good friend, Dr. Teb Bondurant. Teb, good to see you.
Good to see you, sir.
Danny, thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, thank you, Byron.
As we start off the show today, we're going to talk about the Faith Men's Conference coming March 22nd, 23rd. That's the highlight of our conversation. It's all going to center around that. But as we move into the conversation, I want to bring your attention to something I read in a magazine article in Elite Daily. I'm not real familiar with this magazine. It's an online publication, but the title was What It Means to Be a Man in Today's World. It states, gender roles, however, or masculinity or femininity are a set of guidelines we've imposed upon men and women as a consequence of culture and history. We've created and perpetrated a masculine ideal, preventing men from being true to themselves. Danny, is that true or false?
Well, I know that we have a lot of issues with gender identity and confusion. I just really think that when you go back to the biblical record, God created us distinctive, male and female, in the image of God and his purposes and plans for our lives. And yeah, we live in a culture that is very, very, very confused about what does it mean to be a man and what does it mean to be a man who follows God's leadership in his life.
Bartleby, if I'm saying that right, is a student success hub that's been developed by Barnes & Noble Education. Another article that I read this morning says gender roles and its effect on society states gender roles can be so restricting that they affect our lifestyle, workplace, and mentality and self-image. Boys and girls are regulating their behavior in potentially harmful ways in order to adhere to gender norms. Gender roles can make anyone who strives for that ideal lifestyle have a very demanding and oppressive life. What I mean by this is that the perfect life we envision, even if it isn't what we want, it makes us feel like we have to fulfill those roles. I mean, the internet is just covered with that. If you search, what is man's role in today's society?
Absolutely, and the skepticism in our culture about what is a true man or a true woman.
And so this calls the church really to step up, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does.
Okay, what are the biggest issues, Teb, you feel like are facing men today?
Well, you're talking about masculinity. I saw that coming 10 years ago, and probably the person that's done more to stir that, to make it come out right, was Tony Evans. Tony saw that coming also and started dealing with masculinity, and we're in trouble with males. And if you'd asked me what our biggest issues were 10 years ago, I'd have probably said pornography, and it still is up there. But I'm not sure it's quite as strong now as it was 8 or 10 years ago. I think today is busyness. Men are so trapped in busyness that it affects every part of their lives, trying to be the dad and the husband and those that are involved with the church and in their life. And to be able to balance that, balance is a huge thing with men today.
Yeah.
And there's a confusion about how do you do that as a man? And masculinity is almost one of those politically incorrect words to say. If you say it now, it means things differently to other people.
Yeah, according to what we just read.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that is true. And so, the culture right now is, much more emboldened about anything anti-biblical, defining who you are in Christ and who we are as God's, design and creation. And so one of the things that the church is up against is an entire system, that is perpetrating upon the minds of precious teenagers, especially young people and children, that that you can have what you want in terms of your own identity. And that's kind of frightening when you think about the implications of that.
Yeah, and I think this is really invading, the Christian family, the home, that is you're trying to build those principles into your home, teach biblically. Your kids are going off to schools, usually public schools in many cases, public, universities.
Right.
And these are the kind of, statements that they're facing. And so I think it's really important that we clarify as we talk about men, and we're concerned about all men. But the conference, you want any man to come to the conference, whether they're a believer in Jesus Christ or follower of Christ or not, you want them to come.
Absolutely. We're passionate, Byron, about our attempt for our men of faith and men who are Christians in our community, reaching out to their family members, their friends, their fishing buddies, and sharing with them the hope that we have in Christ. Again, Dr. Bondurant is exactly right. We are in trouble. And unless we get some traction of men finding who they are in Christ and stepping up with courage and conviction and saying, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord.
Yeah.
Then, things are going to go from bad to real bad in a hurry.
And that's why I think, gentlemen, that we've got to see something more than just a men's conference here.
Yes.
You remember years ago, there was the movement of the Promise Keepers,
right.
And I think that was successful in many ways. Many men came to Christ as a result and were challenged to do ministry, probably ongoing ministry, but it's something that really fizzled out, maybe it was only for that period of time. Certain things only have a lifespan of, a certain time. So I'm not here to judge that, but to say we need a movement, don't we, among men and God, Teb?
Well, movement is the word that kind of our key word for this conference. Instead of it being just another event, men are a little bit tired of the same old events where they come and hear some really good speakers, and 2 or 3 weeks later they don't really remember what happened. So about 10 years ago, let me back up just a minute. In 1985, if you'll remember,
I was hoping you'd go back that far. I wanted you to, yeah.
The Maximum Man Conference was the dream of Adrian Rogers. And there was not a man's conference at that time in the United States. And his goal was that he would encourage men in their relationship with the Lord, but their relationship with their family and their marriage and their business and the church and their country. And the first conference was here in Memphis, and it was a tremendous success. I was at that conference. It changed my life, pointed me in a different direction in my priorities. But when it was through, Dr. Rogers did not want it to be a Bellevue issue. He wanted to go out to the eastern states. So 4 or 5 of us took that and have been producing the Maximum Man Conference still for years. It had been now in 18 states, and that was 34 years ago. But about 10 years ago, it took a totally different little twist. Still has the same basic drive of the man and his master country family. But we weren't getting out of the church, and passivity and apathy crawled in to men. They were happy just kind of where they were in the church. And instead of getting outside of the church and getting out of their comfort zone. And so we were challenged when we were doing a Maximum Man Conference in Jackson, Tennessee by Tony Evans about this scourge in America called fatherlessness. I didn't even know what that meant because I'm not fatherless. And so he talked to us about that and told us it was driving most of our social pathology of poverty and illiteracy and drugs and gangs and even abortion. And we didn't know what to do. So anyway, we came back home to Faith and our little men's group. We had about 10 guys. And we said, what can we do? We're just men. But God began to open up some avenues that we didn't see coming into high schools and grammar schools and in developmental places where young boys are. And we went out and spent a week with Tony Evans to find out a little bit more about that. And it changed our whole focus and our drive. We took a fledgling little men's ministry of about 10 guys to over 60 guys that are all invested in Memphis in several different ways, 20 or 30 different ministries. And that has been the biggest surprise to me, because before that, doing a men's ministry was like pushing a rope, and it was very difficult. But now you give a man, get him out of his apathy and give him out of his not wanting to do anything, but give him a job and show him how to do it and see how it could honor God and leave a legacy for himself. it's changing, and
Yeah.
I'm so excited about the direction of men's ministry now.
Danny, as Teb's talking about this apathy, among men, how do biblical worldview men typically fall into the trap of living a life of complacency, do you feel?
Yeah, I think Dr. Bondurant Brother Teb mentioned the the busyness issue. We sometimes, I think, feel like we're doing our Christian duty when we're providing for the family, or when we are sure that the kids and the little wife are in church, those kinds of things. And sometimes, I think that the enemy has convinced us that's our only responsibility. But again, man, when we start looking at the biblical record, when you start thinking about what are the responsibilities that God has imposed in our role as husbands, as fathers, we are not to just be supporters, but we're to be leaders. And as Brother Ted mentioned a moment ago, man, we have seen firsthand what happens when men begin to get on our hearts what God has on His heart, not only for their own lives and their own families, but for the community. And our church, Faith Baptist in Bartlett, is only one example. There are good churches and good men's ministries everywhere, but we have literally seen this thing get a little bit out of hand, and I love that. I mean, it's got a life of its own. Brother Teb really doesn't ask permission anymore. We just ask forgiveness, and we just keep rolling. And because guys, they come and say, "Hey, what about doing this? What about going to Wilder Correctional Facility up in Somerville? What about how can we adopt the Douglas K-8 elementary school and really make a difference, not just in name only to plant a few flowers, but to invest our lives in the hearts of young people." And that has been a beautiful thing to watch as godly men begin to say, it's not somebody else's responsibility, it's mine, it's ours. And that's what makes the difference.
Well, you mentioned men and their marriage. I know you both probably over the years have done quite a bit of marriage counseling, with couples. Danny and Teb, jump in here too. What are wives needing most from their husbands, but often come short of receiving, do you feel?
Wow. I know
Dr.
Teb has a great story just in his journey. And so I'll let him share a little bit about that.
Well, I think it's just strictly a matter of priorities and who's on first and who's on second. And our wives see us doing a lot of things in our lives that are important to us, but it's important to us. And sometimes we forget that. And even in Christian work, we can get too busy doing God's work. And I see a lot of that, and we talk about that in our men's group. Sometimes we get too busy and we're not giving them the attention that they feel like they need for their lives. And I'll never forget, Zig Ziglar was asked to come to Memphis to talk to all of the pastors in the several counties. And I went with Brother Jack May. And I was wondering, what would Zig Ziglar talk to 300-400 pastors about? What's the subject? And he started off and he said, "Love is a sweet potato." And I'm thinking, what in the world has that got to do with anything? And what it was, he started talking to all the pastors about their relationship with their wives. And for an hour, he got in their grill. And he said, nobody fights this any harder because of your busyness and your priorities. So I think priorities is one of the big deals, is learning to balance that. We have a mutual friend that's our AV man, Richard Murley, and he taught me a new word this last year. My new word for 2019 is the word sure. If Charlotte, that's my wife. If Charlotte asked me to do something now, I'd say sure. And I'm gonna tell you, that's the best word I've ever had in my life. It's a great
smart man.
I need to write that one down.
Sure.
Well, and we talk about, I think sometimes men battle that line between, their manhood that they feel and then fostering sensitivity and compassion. How can they foster that without compromising their manhood?
That's great. The reality is that inside every grown man, there is a little boy that needs to be affirmed. And we get that primarily from our wives. And if we're not, then we usually end up looking for it in the wrong places. But being compassionate is not the same as being weak or, being a servant. Again, the model of Jesus was, if you want to be great in the kingdom, you want to be first, you got to be the least and last. You got to be a servant. You got to wash feet. You got to get your hands dirty. And I think when a man begins to see himself as a servant to his wife and to his children with great love and compassion, well, the scripture says to love your wives as Christ loved the church, which was total sacrifice, total commitment, and for us to put others before ourselves.
Yes.
And so I think that's really the key. When you get back to the essence of what God's expectations for the husband, it is to model the love of Christ for his church.
Well, you both gentlemen alluded to a moment ago the detriment of fatherless homes, in our society today. And many have grown up in those kind of, and maybe in many cases, the father's been right there in the home, but he still hasn't been present. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yes.
And so what biblical guidance could help build up a man who's come from that distorted childhood? Their father was not active in their lives and never heard the words, "I love you, son."
Yeah, those are absolutely powerful images that come to my mind. I had a father who was present, but not in leadership ways. He was, he was more consumed by his own addictions and other issues. And so one of the things that, hopefully that because of the influence of Christ in our lives, we want to change that cycle. One of the things that I talk about is my role as a father of 3 sons. And what I wanted to do is to model what biblical fatherhood looked like for those guys. Even though I didn't have it, I knew what it should be. I knew what it looked like. And in our conference, one of the things that's going to be one of the things we love about this conference is the breakout sessions. It's not just the big events, big room moments, and worship and good speakers, but in the small group settings. One of my sons, Josh, and I are going to do a breakout session on father-son relationships, because I think that is a key that is so significant and is missing, as in our community and our culture. And so we're going to talk about, the journey. We're going to talk about the good days and the bad days. We're going to get real raw, honest. He's going to talk about what is it like to have a dad who's sometimes too busy and sometimes, preaching to other people, but not living out some of those things. So it's going to be real honest, and it's going to be very, very valuable, I think.
Well, you mentioned yourself and your son will be speaking. Now, you've got a lineup, Tab, of some wonderful speakers. They're going to be joining you guys. You want to talk about some of their backstory and who's going to come join you?
Well, sure. Charles Lauer has been a dear friend of ours from way back and still is. He's now moved a little closer to us. He lives in Gatlinburg.
Can I just say, Charles is a mesmerizing speaker.
He is so good.
He has a way of just grabbing your heart.
And we're keeping him over to preach to our folks on Sunday morning.
Okay.
So, yeah.
But he gives a message called "How to Be the Husband of a Happy Wife," and that's a key message, because last Wednesday night I asked our men, what breaks your heart right now in the culture, in your family, in your business? What is it that really breaks your heart? And we got 120 answers. The number one answer, because we'd been talking about abortion lately, but the second thing was marriages. And I'm thinking, well, isn't that strange? And it wasn't people's marriages outside, it was their marriages. And so that is a big issue on men's minds right now. How do you be the husband of a happy wife? Charles taught me long years ago in 1 Peter 3:7, it says, "Husbands, likewise, live with your wives according to knowledge." And I didn't know what that meant. But by going to Dr. Crichton and several of the key places in Memphis to learn what it meant to live with somebody according to knowledge. The scripture says by wisdom a home is built, by understanding it's established, but by knowledge its rooms are filled with rare and beautiful treasures. And those beautiful treasures are things like contentment and acceptance and forgiveness and being feel comfortable in your own home like you do in your slippers. And just learning what it means to live with somebody according to the knowledge of them and not all about you. So Charles is there, and he will be giving us some several messages for the weekend. He's also speaking at a company here, Brim Foods, and to encourage them in their walk as a business person. I don't know Jason Cook like Brother Danny does, and I'm just looking forward to him. And Danny, you
were telling me former Titan football player.
Yeah, Jason is a new friend of ours. Actually, he's relatively new in Memphis. He's one of the pastors, teaching pastor at Fellowship Memphis, and we really learned of Pastor Jason through a connection with Ed Newton. Ed Newton's also one of our speakers. He's our former staff evangelist, served with us for about 14 years on our staff at Faith. He's now pastoring the largest church in San Antonio, Texas. They have about 22,000 people in attendance on a weekend.
Did you say 22,000?
22,000. He preaches in 5 services on the weekend, and he's just an incredible young man. So Jason and Dr. Ed Newton are buddies. They actually, Jason talks about Ed being a mentor to him of how to preach with passion and those kind of things. And so Jason and I have just gotten acquainted in recent months, and he was so gracious to say yes to the invitation to come speak to our men. He is a powerful, powerful speaker. Of course, he is a football player. He did play at Ole Miss, and then he played briefly with.
So that's the only negative thing, right? If you're a Tiger fan,
okay. Yeah, he's got that mark. But then he did play with the Baltimore Ravens in the NFL, and so then God, interrupted his journey and called him into ministry. He and his family are here with us in our city. Looking forward to maybe having another interview with Pastor Jason on another time, but we're so grateful that he's going to be sharing with us. He's got a heart for reaching, across racial lines. He pastors a multi-ethnic, a very diverse congregation, and so he's going to bring a whole lot to this conference. It's going to help us in a lot of ways. So we're excited about him, and of course the young guys love Ed Newton. He's one of the most passionate speakers you'll ever hear.
Of course, we don't want to leave out Colonel Alan Ferry.
Yeah.
Tell me about Alan.
Well, that just kind of fell to us. He wrote a book called A Man in His Country, and we were looking for somebody to, especially right now in the atmosphere of our country and where we are and talking about our country. And we wanted somebody to come and that loves our country and is a true patriot and loves Jesus. And so we found a man that had written a book about it, and we contacted him. And he's a chaplain, and he lives now in North Carolina. He's written several books about America and patriotism, and served, went to Dallas Theological and went to several other schools. And but he's new for us, and we're excited about him coming. And he'll be wearing his whatever Navy blue or whatever that is, because he's a full colonel. And just to tell us about our history, our remembering stones that we ought to still be looking at and thank God for in our country. So he'll be coming with us. And then we're actually adding one more speaker that, man is a triune being. He's spirit and he's soul, but he's also body. And our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit. And we go to things, but we don't ever talk about a man's health and his body and taking care of that and how important that is for his family, because men kind of put that off sometimes. And so that's kind of what happened to me about a couple of years ago. I was at a men's issue, and a African-American pharmacist encouraged me to go get a checkup. And I did. Well, I wound up having a severe case of prostate cancer. And I would not have known that had he not have urged me to do that. And so we've got a local doctor to come and to just encourage men to start taking good care of themselves and when they ought to be checked for different things in their lives,
right.
And so that they can serve the Lord healthier. And we just don't want to lose a bunch of men.
Yeah, we know we don't. Well, gentlemen, as we start to wrap up our show, I do want to ask you something about your personal journey. What have been some of the toughest issues that you've had to confront as it relates to your personal journey of biblical manhood?
Wow, that's again, we could spend a long time just in our answer to that. But personally, sometimes I think because of my absent father in my life, someone that actually I had the privilege of leading my dad to Christ as a young teenager. So we saw transformation and change happen in his life. But I think sometimes because of the absence of that influence in my life, there's been an overreach in my part, trying to, to be the hero, all things, everything. That sometimes it's really hard to be Superman, and trying to be the best pastor, the best husband, trying to say yes. We talked about a moment ago, Dr. Tebb and I, we can't say no, and so just saying yes. Sometimes I think one of the in my journey, one of the things that I've had to learn and still learning is that word that Brother Tebb mentioned, balance and symmetry, a rhythm of doing what God's called you to do with all of your heart, soul, mind, body, and strength. Whatever you do, do it, exceptionally well as unto the Lord, not unto men. But you know what? We can't do everything, and we can't be everything. So I want to focus on my roles, my responsibilities, of being a real Christian, being a man who, in his relationship with Jesus, is real, authentic, genuine, spending time with the Lord, spending time in the Word, and that comes first. And then my wife, Rhonda, and I, we will celebrate 38 years of marriage coming up in April. Very excited about that. And so one of the things that I'm learning is that she is not just not just part of my life; she's essential to my life. And absolutely, my first area of ministry is my relationship with Rhonda. And then, to be now a father of grown adult sons and have 4 grandsons and a little granddaughter on the way. Finally, we get a granddaughter in the family. Number 5 is going to be a granddaughter. And so, those are roles. And then, have the privilege of being a pastor of one of the great churches. I'm in my 25th year as pastor of Faith Baptist in Bartlett. And all those roles are just, incredible, beautiful. But the challenge for me is to be sure that I'm rooted and grounded in my relationship and my walk with Christ on a daily basis. We never get away from that.
Yeah.
Boy, that's a hard one to follow right there. I would say the balance is as much as anything for me. No is a tough word for me. I about lost a marriage because of not being able to say no. In fact, I was saved just right down the street in a hospital room because I had misused those types of things in my life, and God got a hold of me. And what I've learned, though, in the last few years is that in the relationship at home, it's dynamic. It always changes. Every season of life changes. And you don't think of that when you're young. You just think it's going to always be the same. But as you go through the seasons of life and realize that each one of those demands a little bit different knowledge and a different love and a different encouragement
Yes.
For one another. John Piper wrote a book called Don't Waste Your, actually it was called Don't Waste Your Prostate Cancer, because somebody gave it to him right before my surgery. But the whole thing was, just don't waste your life and don't waste your dash, that you've got left on your little dash on your tombstone. And so that's paramount with me right now, with my relationship with the Lord, my relationship with Charlotte. Our children don't live here anymore, so it's a little harder for us with that. But my relationship with her has become number one after my relationship with the Lord, more so than ever in our life. We've been married 57 years. Mm. We've known each other since the 2nd grade.
Oh, that is so precious. Well, gentlemen, this has been great. Thank you so much for bringing your lives together here to share about the Faith Men's Conference 2019, March 22nd, 23rd. The cost is only $30, and I'm sure that includes some type of meal in there. Usually it does. I don't know.
Yes,
you guys take care of folks when they come. But it's a Friday night and a Saturday, right?
That's correct. And we begin at 6:00 on Friday. The doors open a little bit earlier than that. And this, of course, the price includes all of the conference materials. They get a really nice workbook, the Breakout Sessions, and a really nice breakfast on Saturday morning. That is, I'm talking about serious, good breakfast. Yeah. The price of the conference is covered. That's worth it right there.
Exactly. And if you want information to get those tickets and more details, go to myfaithbaptist.org, myfaithbaptist.org, and get that information. Danny, Teb, God bless you. Thank you for what you both do for Christ's kingdom. You encourage me so much. I'm glad that we're friends. Thank you for joining Bot Radio today.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Byron.
Thank you, Byron.
Well, friends, that's all the time we have on this edition of Mid-South Viewpoint. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget the website, myfaithbaptist.org and myfaithbaptist.org. We'll talk to you next time. Hey, thanks for listening. Bye-bye. And to our YouTube viewers who are still watching live as we do this program, thanks for stopping by. Please subscribe to my channel, share the video, and better yet, make sure you come out March 22nd, 23rd to the men's conference at Faith Baptist Church. It's going to be great. Danny, any word specifically to our YouTube viewers right now?
Just to say thank you. Thank you for praying for us. Even if you can't attend, please be in prayer that God would just really grab a hold of the hearts of men in our community.
All right. Teb, thank you too. All right. We'll say goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.